Velshara's fingers moved across the holographic display with practiced precision. The star chart floated before her like a web of light, each point representing a world, each line a trade route. She had been mapping the outer reaches for 3 years now, cataloging every asteroid field and nebula that the Concordate's ships might need to navigate. It was quiet work, lonely work, but she preferred it that way. The office around her hummed with the gentle sound of data processors. Through the wide viewport, the stars hung like distant diamonds against the black. Velshara was a Keshari, her kind known throughout the galaxy for their attention to detail and steady temperament. Her scales were a deep blue, darker than most of her species, and her 4 eyes could process more visual information than almost any other sentient race. Perfect traits for a cartographer. She was reviewing the day's astronomical surveys when the anomaly appeared. At first, she thought it was a processing error. The old navigation data she had been cross-referencing with current charts showed something impossible. A deviation. A small one, barely noticeable, but it was there. Velshara leaned closer to the display, her primary eyes narrowing while her secondary eyes scanned the surrounding data. The coordinates pointed to the edge of Sector 447, right where the Forbidden Territories began. She felt her scales prickle with unease. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Forbidden Territories. For 847 years, that vast section of space had been sealed off from all traffic. The official reason, taught in every school across every member world of the Concordate, was contamination. Something terrible had happened to the humans, something that made their entire civilization collapse overnight. The contamination was unknown, possibly biological, possibly technological, but certainly deadly. No ship was permitted to enter. No probe was sent to investigate. The borders were absolute. But this old data, dated from before the collapse, showed coordinates that didn't match the current Forbidden Zone boundaries. The difference was small, perhaps only a few light years, but in cartography, precision was everything. Either the old data was wrong or the current boundaries were. Velshara sat back in her chair considering. She should report this to her supervisor and move on. It was probably nothing. Just corrupted data from an archive that was nearly a millennium old. But something nagged at her. The deviation was too precise to be corruption. It looked deliberate. She pulled up more historical archives requesting data from the earliest days after humanity's disappearance. The Concordate had formed in the power vacuum left by the humans, uniting the dozen species that had once traded with or feared humanity. The Keshari, the Volnath, the Shren, and others had come together to maintain order. They had been the ones to establish the quarantine zones. As Velshara dug deeper into the archives, she found more inconsistencies. In the first 50 years after humanity vanished, the Forbidden Zones had changed boundaries 17 times. Each time they had grown larger. That made no sense if they were simply quarantining a contamination. A contamination would spread or it wouldn't, but it wouldn't require constant expansion of the boundaries. Her communicator chimed. Velshara glanced at it and saw a message from her supervisor, Administrator Krell. He was a Volnath, one of the heavy world species with thick armor plating and a personality to match. Velshara, I need those outer reaches updates by end of cycle. No delays. She sent back a quick confirmation and returned to her work, but her mind kept wandering back to the discrepancy. Over the next several days, she found herself spending her personal time diving deeper into the historical archives. She requested access to older and older files, some of them barely ever accessed, their data formats ancient and requiring specialized software to read. What she found disturbed her more with each discovery. In the years immediately after humanity's disappearance, there had been expeditions into human territory. Small ones, cautious ones, but they had happened. The Concordate's predecessor organization had sent research vessels to investigate what had happened. Velshara found mission logs from 3 separate expeditions. The first expedition had consisted of 2 ships. They had crossed into human territory, traveled for 6 days, and then gone silent. No distress call, no final transmission, nothing. They simply stopped responding. The second expedition, larger and better armed, had lasted 9 days before they too went silent. The third expedition never made it past the border. Their ships had been destroyed the moment they crossed into forbidden space. The attack had been swift and precise, leaving no survivors. After that, the Concordate had declared the territories absolutely forbidden. No exceptions. But here was the strange part. The logs from the third expedition, in the final moments before the ships were destroyed, had recorded something. The attacking vessels had been human ships. Not derelicts, not automated defenses, but crude vessels following tactical patterns that indicated intelligent command. Velshara read that passage 5 times, certain she was misunderstanding. But the data was clear. 847 years ago, just months after humanity had supposedly vanished, human ships had destroyed concordate vessels for entering their territory. She leaned back from her workstation, her mind racing. If humans had been present to defend their borders, then they hadn't vanished. They had withdrawn, deliberately, and the Concordate had known about it. The implications made her scales itch. Why would the Concordate lie? Why maintain a fiction about contamination, when the truth was that humanity had simply closed its borders? And more importantly, why had humanity closed those borders in the first place? Velshara knew she should stop digging. This was beyond her clearance level, beyond her responsibilities. She was a cartographer, not a historian or a politician. But the questions burned in her mind like small stars demanding attention. She began looking for any other references to humanity in the archives. There were plenty, of course. Before their disappearance, humans had been one of the major powers in this region of the galaxy. They hadn't been the strongest militarily or the most numerous, but they had possessed something that made other species wary: unpredictability combined with frightening competence. Velshara found accounts from Kashari merchants who had traded with humans. They described a species that seemed friendly and curious, eager to learn and quick to adapt. But she also found military reports from the Volnath, who had once tested human resolve with a border skirmish. The humans had responded with a ferocity that shocked everyone. They hadn't just defended their territory. They had counterattacked with strategies that the Volnath commanders had never seen before. The war had lasted 3 months before both sides agreed to peace, but the Volnath had learned to respect human capabilities. There were cultural reports, too. Humans loved their stories, apparently. They created elaborate fictions about themselves, tales where they overcame impossible odds or explored strange new worlds. Some species found this habit odd, but Velshara thought she understood it. Humans use stories to imagine what they might become. And then, in the year that the Concordate marked as 2287 in the old human calendar, all human communications had simply stopped. Every colony, every ship, every station went silent within the span of a single day. The galaxy had waited for an explanation, for some sign of what had happened, but none came. The borders that humans had maintained became impenetrable walls. Any ship that tried to cross them was destroyed. Eventually, the other species had simply accepted it and moved on. The Concordate was formed, new trade routes were established, and humanity became a ghost story that parents told their children. Stay away from the forbidden territories. Don't ask what happened to the humans. Some mysteries are better left alone. But Velshara couldn't leave it alone now. She had found the inconsistency, the crack in the official story, and like water finding a flaw in stone, her curiosity flowed into every gap. She made a decision that she knew was dangerous. She would need to access restricted archives, files that were above her clearance level. She would need to break protocol. But she had to know. The Concordate maintained its central archives on the station where Velshara worked, but the truly sensitive files were kept in a separate system with enhanced security. She spent 2 weeks studying the security protocols, learning the patterns of the automated monitors, finding the vulnerabilities. Her species' natural gift for detail served her well. On a quiet night cycle, when most of the station was asleep, Velshara made her move. She used a combination of her legitimate access and carefully crafted exploits to bypass the security on the restricted archives. Her heart hammered in her chest as she waited for alarms that never came. She was in. The restricted files were extensive, covering everything from military secrets to diplomatic incidents that could destabilize the Concordate if they became public. Velshara ignored all of that and focused her search on one thing: humanity. What she found made her blood run cold. There were reports here, eyes-only documents meant for the Concordate Council, that painted a very different picture of humanity's disappearance. According to these files, the Concordate's intelligence services had maintained monitoring stations along the borders of human territory for the first 200 years after the silence began. Those stations had detected activity, lots of it. Human ships moved through their territory. Energy signatures suggested thriving colonies and active industry. Communications existed, but they were all short-range and heavily encrypted, nearly impossible to intercept. Whatever the humans were doing in their isolated space, they were doing it deliberately and carefully. One report, dated 153 years after the silence, included analysis from the Concordate's best scientific minds. Their conclusion was chilling. Humanity had enacted what they called a silence protocol. For reasons unknown, humanity had decided to eliminate all long-range electromagnetic emissions. Every signal that might travel beyond their borders had been shut down or shielded. They had made themselves invisible to the galaxy. But why? Velshara found a partial answer in a report from an intelligence operative who had managed to capture and decrypt a fragment of human communication from the early days of the silence. The message was incomplete, but certain phrases stood out. Can't let them know we're here. The signal draws them closer. Everyone must go silent or everyone dies. The report's author had speculated that humanity had detected some kind of threat, something that tracked electromagnetic signals. The humans had tried to warn the other species according to one unconfirmed account, but no one had believed them. So humanity had done the only thing they could. They had disappeared, hoping to take the threat's attention with them. Velshara sat in the darkness of her office, the holographic display casting blue light across her face. She felt the weight of what she had discovered pressing down on her like a physical force. Humanity hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had tried to save it. And the Concordate had covered up the truth, perhaps because admitting it would mean admitting they had ignored humanity's warning. She copied the files to an encrypted storage device, knowing that possessing them was probably a serious crime. Then she carefully erased all traces of her intrusion and logged out of the restricted system. For the rest of that night, Velshara sat by her viewport, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the forbidden borders, humanity still existed. They were hiding, staying silent, protecting themselves from something. And if that threat was real, if humanity's fears had been justified, then what did it mean that the rest of the galaxy had spent 800 years broadcasting their presence to the cosmos? What had they invited to find them? Velshara made another decision, one that would change everything. She couldn't keep this knowledge to herself, but she also couldn't trust the Concordate Council with it. They had already proven they would hide the truth. No, she needed to see for herself. She needed to go to the forbidden territories and find out what humanity was hiding from. The next morning, she submitted a request for personal leave. 3 months, she told her supervisor, to visit her home world. Krell approved it without question. Velshara had never taken a vacation in the 3 years she had worked for him. But she wasn't going home. She was going to do something that no one had attempted in over 8 centuries. She was going to cross the border into human territory. She was going to find humanity and learn the truth no matter what it cost her. As she began making preparations, purchasing supplies, and quietly reaching out to a few trusted colleagues who might join her on this insane mission, Velshara kept thinking about the old human stories she had read about in the archives, the ones where humans faced impossible odds and did impossible things. She wondered if she was brave enough to be part of a story like that. She supposed she was about to find out. The listening post hung in space like a dead insect, its solar panels spread wide but coated in centuries of cosmic dust. Station 773 had been abandoned for more than 600 years, left to drift at the edge of the forbidden territories when the Concordate had finally given up trying to monitor human space. Now it rotated slowly, a forgotten monument to curiosity that had died long ago. Velshara's ship approached carefully, its sensors scanning for any sign of danger. Behind her in the small crew compartment sat 3 others who had agreed to join her on this mad journey. There was Korth, a Volnath engineer with more courage than sense. Beside him sat Miara and Ten, a bonded pair of Shren navigators who had grown bored with safe, predictable trade routes. They were all criminals now, Velshara supposed. The moment they had filed a false flight plan and turned their ship toward forbidden space, they had broken Concordate law, but none of them had hesitated. Station looks dead. Korth rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through the deck plates. No power signature, no active systems. That's what we expected, Velshara replied, though her scales prickled with nervousness. We just need to access the archives. The data storage should still be intact even without power. Miara, the smaller of the 2 Shren, chirped from the navigation console. The station's orbit has decayed. It's closer to the border than it should be. Maybe 2,000 kilometers inside the Forbidden Zone now. That made everyone pause. They had planned to stay outside the border, using the station's position at the very edge to minimize risk. But 2,000 kilometers shouldn't matter, Velshara told herself. It was nothing compared to the vast distances of space, and yet knowing they were technically inside the Forbidden Zone made her secondary hearts beat faster. "We proceed," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Dock with the station, get the data, and leave." Quick and simple. 10 guided their ship toward the station's docking ring with practiced ease. The ancient clamps engaged with a series of mechanical clanks that echoed through the hull. For several minutes they waited, holding their breath as if expecting alarms or weapons to activate. Nothing happened. The station remained dark and silent. They suited up and crossed through the airlock into the station proper. Their suit lights cut through absolute darkness, revealing corridors that hadn't seen life in longer than any of them had been alive. Dust floated in their wake, disturbed for the first time in centuries. The walls were covered in the old concordate markings, arrows and labels in multiple languages pointing toward different sections. "Archives should be in the core section," Velshara said, consulting the station schematics she had downloaded. 3 levels down. They made their way through the dead station, their magnetic boots clunking against the deck. Everything was eerily preserved. Coffee cups still sat on desks in what had been the crew quarters. Workstations displayed frozen screens, their displays long since failed. It was like walking through a moment of time that had been paused and then forgotten. The archive room was larger than Velshara had expected, filled with rows of data storage units that stretched from floor to ceiling. These were old-style physical storage devices, not modern quantum banks, more reliable for long-term preservation, but also much slower to access. Korth pulled a portable power unit from his equipment pack and began connecting it to the archive system. "This is going to take a while," he warned. "These old systems need to boot up safely or we could corrupt the data." They waited in the darkness, watching as Korth worked. Slowly, lights began to appear on the storage units. Status indicators flickered to life like small green eyes opening after a long sleep. The main terminal activated with a soft hum, its screen glowing pale blue in the darkness. Velshara moved to the terminal and began navigating the file structure. The archives were extensive, containing hundreds of years of monitoring data from when this station had been active. She searched for the most recent entries, the last recordings before the station had been abandoned. What she found made her pause. The monitoring had continued long after the station was supposedly abandoned. Automated systems had kept recording, kept listening, right up until the power had finally failed 63 years ago. That meant there were centuries of data here that the Concordate had never retrieved, never analyzed. They had simply left it all here to be forgotten. "I'm finding something," Velshara said softly. "Lots of recorded activity from inside human territory." The sensors were still working. She pulled up the files and began reviewing them. At first, it was hard to make sense of the raw data. Energy signatures, mass detector readings, electromagnetic spectrum analysis. But as she studied the patterns, a picture began to emerge. Human ships had been active throughout the Forbidden Zone for all those centuries. Not just a few ships, but thousands of them. They had moved in organized patterns, following routes between what appeared to be thriving colonies. The energy signatures showed industrial activity, population centers, agriculture. Humanity hadn't died out or collapsed. They had been living their lives, building their civilization, completely hidden behind their silent borders. But there was more. The automated systems had also recorded something else. Ships that had tried to cross into human territory from the outside were tracked by the sensors. Velshara found records of 17 different vessels over 600 years that had attempted to enter the Forbidden Zone. Some had been smugglers looking for salvage. Others had been researchers like herself, motivated by curiosity. None of them had made it more than a few thousand kilometers past the border. The sensor logs showed what had happened with cold precision. Each time a ship crossed into human space, automated defense systems had activated. Weapons platforms that hadn't been there moments before suddenly appeared, emerging from stealth or from hidden positions among the asteroids and debris at the border. They would target the intruding vessel and destroy it with swift efficiency. Then the platforms would disappear again, returning to whatever hiding places they had emerged from. "They're protecting the border," Miara said, reading over Velshara's shoulder. "All this time they've had automated guardians watching. Not just automated, Velshara replied, pointing at the tactical analysis the station systems had performed. Look at the response patterns. They adapt. Each intrusion was met with different tactics. These systems are learning, improving. There's real intelligence behind them, Korth grunted, or there are humans actively controlling them, staying hidden and silent, but still watching the borders. Velshara continued digging through the files, searching for anything that might explain why humanity had done this. She found partial communications that the sensors had intercepted over the years. All of them were fragmentary, heavily encrypted and shielded, but the station systems had been sophisticated, designed by the best intelligence services in the Concordat. They had managed to decrypt small portions of the human communications. One fragment, dated 227 years after the silence, contained a report from what appeared to be a human military vessel. Patrol Sector 447 clear, no signs of echo activity, no alien incursions, maintaining radio silence protocols. All colonies reporting normal status. Project Sanctuary proceeding as planned. Echo activity. Project Sanctuary. The words meant nothing to Velshara, but they felt significant. She searched for more references to either term and found scattered mentions throughout the decades of monitoring. Another fragment, much older, from just 15 years after the silence began. Colony ships proceeding to fallback positions. All long-range communications suspended. Hope the others understood the warning. If they didn't, we can't help them. We can only save who we can save. A chill ran through Velshara's scales. The warning. Humanity had tried to warn someone about something. About this echo, perhaps. But no one had listened or understood. She found more fragments, piecing them together like shards of broken glass. 73 years since the last detection. Maybe they moved on. Can't risk it. The protocol stays in effect. Our children ask why we can't talk to the stars. How do we explain we're hiding from them? Ten's voice interrupted her reading. Velshara, you need to see this. The Shren navigator was at a different terminal, pulling up sensor logs from a specific time period. I was looking at the most recent data, from right before the station's power failed. There's something strange here. Velshara moved to look at what Ten had found. The sensor readings showed the usual activity within human space. But there was something else. Deep space scans pointed not at human territory but outward, toward the galactic rim, toward the dark spaces between spiral arms where stars were sparse and few ships ever traveled. The sensors had detected something. Objects moving through that dark space. Big objects, each one massive enough to generate a gravity signature that could be detected from thousands of light years away. They were moving slowly but with clear purpose, and their trajectory was bringing them toward the galactic core, toward civilized space. How many? Velshara asked quietly. Ten manipulated the display, counting the signatures. At least 20. Maybe more. Hard to tell at this range. When were these readings taken? 63 years ago, right before the station went dark. Velshara felt her stomach drop. 63 years ago, these things had been at the galactic rim. How fast were they moving? Where were they now? She did quick calculations in her head, estimating trajectories and velocities, if the objects had maintained their course and speed. They could be here soon, she whispered. Maybe they're already here. Korth stepped closer, his armored bulk crowding the terminal. What are they? I don't know, but I think this is what humanity was hiding from. These are the echoes. Miara made a distressed sound, her feathers puffing in agitation. We need to tell the Concordat. If there's a threat coming, they won't believe us, Velshara said. We're criminals now, remember? We broke quarantine. They'll arrest us the moment we return, and this data will disappear into classified archives just like everything else about humanity. She stared at the display, at those massive signatures moving through the dark. A terrible understanding was forming in her mind. Humanity had seen these things coming. They had tried to warn the other species. And when no one believed them, when no one would listen, humanity had done the only thing they could. They had gone silent, hoping that whatever these things were, they tracked noise. They tracked signals, and if everyone went quiet, maybe the things would pass by without noticing. But the rest of the galaxy hadn't gone quiet. For 800 years, the Concordat and all its member species had continued broadcasting, continued filling space with radio signals and faster-than-light communications. They had been ringing a bell in the darkness, never knowing what might hear it. We need to go deeper, Velshara said suddenly. Into human territory. We need to find them and learn what they know about these things. That's suicide, Korth protested. Those defense systems will destroy us. Maybe. But maybe if we broadcast the right message, if we can make them understand we know about the echoes, they'll let us through. They'll talk to us. It was a wild hope, probably foolish. But Velshara couldn't think of any other option. They had come this far. They had learned enough to know that something terrible was potentially coming for the entire galaxy. They couldn't turn back now. Download everything, she ordered. All the data from these archives. We need copies of all of it. While Korth worked to transfer the data, Velshara composed a message. She recorded it carefully, choosing each word with precision. It was addressed to humanity, to anyone who might be listening on the other side of the border. She explained who they were, what they had found, and that they understood about the silence. She asked for permission to enter. She asked for humanity's help. When the download was complete, they returned to their ship. Velshara set the message to broadcast on multiple frequencies, repeating on a loop. Then they undocked from the dead station and turned their ship toward the heart of the forbidden territories. Here we go, Ten said quietly. They crossed deeper into human space, past the point of no return. Velshara watched her sensors, waiting for the defense systems to activate, waiting for weapons to lock onto their ship. Minutes passed, then hours, but nothing happened. Either their message was working, or the automated systems had decided their tiny ship wasn't worth the ammunition. Either way, they were alive and moving deeper into territory no one had entered in 8 centuries. The stars ahead looked the same as the stars behind, but Velshara felt like they were crossing into another world. Somewhere ahead, humanity was waiting, and somewhere in the dark beyond, the echoes were coming. They flew on in silence, not knowing which they would find first. 3 days into the forbidden territories, they found the fleet. At first, Velshara thought her sensors were malfunctioning. The readings showed thousands of ships all clustered together in a perfect spherical formation around a small red dwarf star. No, not thousands. Tens of thousands. Perhaps hundreds of thousands. It was impossible to get an accurate count because they were packed so densely together. What in the name of stars? Korth breathed, staring at the display. They approached slowly, cautiously, still broadcasting their message of peaceful intent. As they drew closer, the true scale of what they were seeing became apparent. The ships weren't just gathered randomly. They were organized into layers like the shells of some enormous spherical structure. Each layer contained ships of similar size and type. Massive colony vessels formed the outer layers. Military ships occupied the middle layers. Smaller craft filled the spaces between, and they were all completely dark. No engines running except for minimal station-keeping thrusters. No weapons charged, no communications being transmitted. The entire fleet hung in space like a monument to silence, like a graveyard of ships that had chosen to stop moving rather than die. Life signs? Velshara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Miara worked her console, running deep scans. Yes, faint but present. Lots of them. Millions, maybe billions. But they're dormant, like they're sleeping. Suspended animation, Ten said with certainty. The whole fleet is in cold sleep. They navigated through the outer layers, searching for anything that might explain what was happening here. Velshara's mind raced with questions. Why would humanity put itself to sleep? Why gather in one place? And where was everyone else? Had all of humanity come here? Or were there other fleets like this scattered through the forbidden territories? Their ship's proximity alarm suddenly activated. Something was approaching. Something fast. A single small craft detached from one of the inner layers and accelerated toward them. It was sleek and angular, its design unlike anything Velshara had seen before. Clearly human in origin, but advanced far beyond what humanity had possessed 800 years ago. Should we run? Korth asked, his hand moving toward the weapons console. No, Velshara said firmly. We came here to make contact. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. The human ship matched their velocity and position, then transmitted a docking request. Standard protocol, the same in any language. Velshara accepted. The two ships connected with a soft thump. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then their airlock cycled and a figure stepped through. It was wearing an environmental suit clearly designed for a human body. 2 arms, 2 legs, a helmet covering its head. But through the clear faceplate, Velshara could see that this wasn't a biological human. The face was too perfect, too symmetrical. The eyes glowed with a soft blue light. This was an artificial intelligence housed in a synthetic body. "Welcome," the AI said, its voice carrying through their ship's communication system. It spoke in perfect Kashari, then repeated the greeting in Volnath and Shren. "I am Sentinel-7. I have been waiting a long time for someone to find us." Velshara stepped forward, her natural diplomat's instincts taking over despite the strangeness of the situation. "My name is Velshara. We come seeking knowledge, seeking to understand what happened to humanity." The AI tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost human. "Then you are braver than most, or more foolish. Perhaps both. Come, I will show you. But you must understand, what you learn here cannot be unlearned. The burden of this knowledge is heavy." They followed the AI back through the docking collar and into the human ship. The interior was pristine, maintained by automated systems for centuries. The AI led them to what appeared to be a command center, where holographic displays floated in the air showing the vast fleet outside. "This is Sanctuary Fleet Omega," the AI explained. "One of 50 such fleets scattered throughout what you call the Forbidden Territories. Each fleet contains between 500 million and 2 billion human beings, all in suspended animation. We are the remnants of a civilization that chose survival through silence." "Why?" Velshara asked. "What were you running from?" The AI's glowing eyes seemed to dim slightly. "We were not running. We were hiding. There is a difference." It gestured and the holographic displays changed. Now they showed images of deep space, the dark regions between galaxies. And in that darkness something moved. "We called them the Echo Hunters," the AI said. "Others who encountered them before us called them different names, or had no names at all because they didn't survive long enough to name them. They are old, perhaps as old as the galaxy itself. They exist in the deep dark, in the spaces where organic life cannot go, and they hunt." The images zoomed in on one of the massive objects. It was difficult to understand what they were looking at. The thing had no clear shape, or perhaps it had too many shapes all at once. It seemed to shift and change, as if it existed partially outside normal space. But one thing was clear: it was enormous, large enough to swallow entire planets. "What do they hunt?" Korth asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thought," the AI replied simply. "Consciousness, sentience. They are drawn to the electromagnetic signatures that thinking minds produce, especially when those minds use technology to amplify their presence. Radio signals, faster than light communications, quantum entanglement networks, all of it calls to them like a beacon in the dark." Velshara felt her scales go cold. "How do you know this?" "Because humanity wasn't the first species they found," the AI said. 700 years before we went silent, we discovered a dead civilization at the Galactic Rim. The predecessors, we called them. They had been far more advanced than us, but they had been wiped out completely. It took us decades to piece together what had happened to them from the ruins they left behind. The holographic display changed again, showing ruins on a dozen different worlds. Cities that had been scoured clean of life, technology that had been melted and twisted, and everywhere, the same warning repeated in a language that humanity had painstakingly decoded. We spoke into the dark, and the dark answered. "Silence is survival." "We thought it was metaphor at first," the AI continued. "A warning about some ancient war, perhaps. But our deep space monitoring stations began detecting them, the Echo Hunters moving through the dark spaces, following the traces of electromagnetic signals. We watched them destroy an emerging civilization on the far side of the galaxy, a species that had just discovered radio. They broadcast their presence for less than 50 years before the hunters found them." The AI paused, and when it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been sorrow. "We tried to warn the other species. The Kashari, the Volnath, the Shren, all the civilizations in this region. We showed them our data, our projections. We told them that if we didn't all go silent, the hunters would eventually detect us." "What did they say?" Velshara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "They didn't believe us. They thought we were trying to trick them, to gain some strategic advantage. Or they simply couldn't accept the reality of what we were telling them. The Volnath said we were cowards, inventing threats to excuse our own weakness. The Shren said the universe was too large for such predators to be a real danger. Your own people, the Kashari, said the evidence was insufficient and the risk was acceptable." The AI gestured at the fleet outside. "So we made a choice. If the rest of the galaxy wouldn't go silent, we would have to do it alone. Project Sanctuary was created. We gathered every human we could. built these fleets and came here to the most remote regions of our territory. We shut down every long-range transmission. We destroyed every relay station and communication satellite. We made ourselves invisible. But the defense systems, Velshara said, the attacks on ships that crossed your border. Necessary, the AI said. And there was something hard in its voice now. Every ship that entered our space was a potential source of transmissions. We couldn't risk them broadcasting our location. The automated defense platforms were programmed to eliminate any threat to the silence. It was cruel, but the alternative was extinction. Miara spoke up for the first time since boarding the human ship. You said there are 50 fleets. How many humans in total? 93 billion, the AI replied. Nearly the entire population of humanity when we began the Sanctuary Protocol. We left behind only small crews to maintain the defense systems and monitor for Echo Hunter activity. Those crews lived in complete isolation, raising children who would take over the watch generation after generation. Most of them are gone now, their stations automated and empty. And you? Velshara asked. Are you human? The AI was quiet for a moment. I was once. My name was Sarah Chen. I was a military commander assigned to protect Sanctuary Fleet Omega. When my biological body grew old, I chose to transfer my consciousness into this synthetic form so I could continue the watch. That was 712 years ago. I am the last of the Watchers. All the others have either chosen final death or transferred to suspended animation with the rest. 700 years alone. The weight of that solitude pressed on Velshara like physical force, to remain awake and aware while billions of your own kind slept, standing guard against a threat that might never come. It was a sacrifice beyond comprehension. Why not wake them? Ten asked. If you've been safe all this time. Because the hunters are still out there, Sarah replied. Our deep sensors detect them regularly, always moving, always searching. And because. She paused, then continued with something like pain in her artificial voice. Because waking them would mean admitting that our sacrifice might have been for nothing. That we abandoned the rest of the galaxy to save ourselves. That we have been hiding like frightened children, while other civilizations continue to live and grow and explore. You weren't cowards, Velshara said firmly. You tried to warn everyone. What else could you have done? Sarah turned her glowing eyes toward the alien cartographer. We could have stayed. We could have fought. We could have tried harder to make the others understand. Instead, we ran and hid and hoped the problem would go away. And has it? Korth asked. Gone away, I mean. The AI pulled up a new set of sensor readings, these ones recent. No, in fact, the situation has grown worse. The Echo Hunters have been moving into this region of the galaxy more frequently over the past century. We believe they are tracking the Concordate's FTL communications. Your species have been broadcasting at ever-increasing volumes for 800 years. The hunters can follow those signals like a trail of breadcrumbs. Velshara felt her secondary hearts skip a beat. How close are they? The nearest group of 3 hunters crossed into the outer reaches of Concordate space approximately 4 months ago. They are moving slowly, but with purpose. At their current rate of travel, they will reach the core systems in less than 2 years. We have to warn them, Miara said urgently. The Concordate needs to know. They won't believe you, Sarah said sadly. Just as they didn't believe us. They will call you mad or liars. They will suppress the information to prevent panic. And by the time they can no longer deny what's coming, it will be too late. Velshara paced the command center, her mind racing. Then we need proof, evidence they can't deny. What you need, Sarah said slowly, is help from the one species that knows how to hide from the hunters. What you need is humanity. Will they help? Velshara asked. After everything that's happened? Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I don't know. That decision isn't mine to make, but I can wake the command council. I can present your case to them and let them decide whether humanity should emerge from silence after 8 centuries. She looked at Velshara with those glowing artificial eyes. But you need to understand what you're asking. If we help you, if we break our silence, we risk drawing the hunters' attention to ourselves. We would be gambling the survival of 93 billion humans on the hope that we can save the rest of the galaxy. I know, Velshara said quietly. But isn't that what it means to be part of a galactic community? To risk yourself for others? Sarah made a sound that might have been a laugh. Spoken like someone who has never had to watch their entire species go extinct. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps we have been hiding long enough. She turned to her controls and began entering commands. I'm initiating the wake-up sequence for the Command Council. 12 individuals who will speak for all of humanity. It will take 3 days for them to come out of suspension safely. In that time, I suggest you prepare your arguments well, because you're asking humanity to come out of the dark and face the monsters we've been hiding from for 800 years. As Velshara watched the ancient AI work, she wondered if she had just saved the galaxy or doomed it. Time would tell, and time, she suspected, was running out. The message reached Concordat Central 3 days after Velshara's ship had crossed into the Forbidden Territories. By then, it was already too late to stop what was coming. Administrator Krell received the emergency transmission in his office on the cartography station where Velshara had worked. At first, he assumed it was a malfunction or a prank. The message was being broadcast from deep inside forbidden space, from coordinates that should have been empty. It claimed to be from Velshara herself. This is cartographer Velshara to Concordat Central. I have made contact with humanity. They are alive. They have been hiding in silence for 8 centuries to protect themselves from a threat they call the Echo Hunters. These entities are real, they are dangerous, and they are already entering Concordat space. We need to prepare defensive measures immediately. This is not a drill. This is not a hoax. I am transmitting all data we have collected. Please respond. Krell stared at the message for a full minute before forwarding it to the Concordat Council with a flag marked potential security breach. He expected them to dismiss it as the ranting of someone who had gone mad in isolation. He did not expect the emergency session they called within the hour. Within 6 hours, the entire Concordat was in chaos. The data Velshara had transmitted included the sensor readings from Station 773, showing the Echo Hunters moving through dark space. It included decrypted fragments of human communications. Most damning of all, it included recent scans from the Concordat's own deep space monitoring network. Scans that had been filed away and ignored for months, showing massive objects entering the outer reaches of civilized space. When the Council's scientists compared the data, they found that Velshara's information matched perfectly with observations they had dismissed as sensor errors or natural phenomena. The Echo Hunters weren't coming. They were already here. The first attacks began on the edge of Concordat space in the outer colonies where fewer ships traveled and fewer eyes were watching. The colony on Kresh 7 was the first to fall silent. It was a mining world, home to 200,000 Volnath who extracted rare minerals from the planet's crust. They had stopped transmitting without warning. When a supply ship arrived to investigate, they found the colony intact but completely empty. Every building stood undamaged. Every machine still ran, but every living thing was gone, as if the entire population had simply vanished. Then it happened again, and again. Colonies across the outer rim went silent one by one, like lights being switched off in sequence. Each time, investigation teams found the same thing. Empty cities, running technology, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just absence. The Concordat tried to suppress the information, tried to prevent panic. But panic spread anyway, the way fire spreads through dry grass. Rumors filled the communication networks. Some said it was a plague. Others said it was humanity taking revenge for being abandoned. A few whispered about monsters from dark space. But most people dismissed that as superstition, until the visual evidence arrived. A freight captain named Jolix had been running a cargo route through the outer systems when her ship's long-range sensors detected something. She had activated her recording systems and captured 12 minutes of footage before jumping to FTL and running for the nearest inhabited system. The footage showed one of the Echo Hunters. Clearly, for the first time, it was massive beyond any ship or station that had ever been built. Kilometers across, perhaps tens of kilometers, shifting and changing shape as if it couldn't decide what form to take. Or perhaps it existed in more dimensions than the 3 that ordinary matter occupied. Its surface, if it could be called a surface, seemed to ripple with patterns that hurt to look at directly. And it was feeding. The colony world of Teresh III hung in space before it. still broadcasting distress signals, still sending out emergency transmissions begging for help. The Echo Hunter oriented itself toward the planet and then somehow reached out, not with any physical appendage, but with something else. A distortion in space itself, a warping of reality that extended from the hunter to the world below. The planet's electromagnetic field flickered and died. Every transmission ceased instantly, and then the lights went out. Every light in every city all at once. The planet went dark as if a switch had been thrown. The Echo Hunter remained there for several hours, and in the recording, it seemed to pulse with a strange inner glow that grew brighter with each passing minute. Then it simply moved on, drifting toward the next star system, leaving a dead world behind. When the recording was broadcast across the Concordate, panic turned to terror. Ships fled the outer colonies, racing toward the core systems where they hoped the concentration of defensive stations might offer protection. But that only made things worse. Each fleeing ship broadcast its position and trajectory. Each distress call rang out across the void, and the Echo Hunters followed the signals like predators following blood trails. The Concordate military mobilized, but they had no idea how to fight an enemy like this. How do you shoot at something that seems to exist partially outside normal space? How do you defend against an enemy that can reach through your shields and simply switch off your consciousness? They tried anyway. Admiral Thross of the Volnath Third Fleet made the first attempt at engaging an Echo Hunter directly. His fleet of 200 warships surrounded the entity in the Kelvin system and opened fire with every weapon they possessed. Energy beams, missiles, kinetic rounds, even experimental quantum disruptors. Everything passed through the Echo Hunter as if it wasn't there. Or rather, as if it was there but also not there, existing in a state that made conventional weapons useless. The Echo Hunter's response was simple and devastating. It pulsed once, a ripple of whatever alien energy it commanded washing out from its center. Every ship in the fleet went dark simultaneously. 200 warships, each carrying a crew of hundreds or thousands, simply stopped. They drifted in space like empty hulls, their crews gone, their systems still running on automation but with no one left to command them. After that, no one tried to fight the Echo Hunters directly. The strategy became retreat and silence. The Concordate Council issued emergency protocols. All non-essential communications were to cease. All colonies were to power down long-range transmitters. Every ship was to minimize its electromagnetic signature. But 800 years of technological development couldn't be undone overnight. The Concordate's entire infrastructure depended on constant communication. Power grids, transportation networks, food distribution, all of it relied on systems that broadcast signals across space. Shutting it all down would mean chaos and death from starvation and system failures. And even if they had shut down everything, it was too late. The Echo Hunters had already locked onto the signals that had been broadcasting for centuries. They knew where the civilized worlds were. They were coming for all of them. Velshara watched the news feeds from the safety of the human fleet, horror filling her as she saw the scale of the disaster unfold. She had tried to warn them. She had transmitted everything she knew as soon as she could. But it hadn't been enough. Hadn't been soon enough. "This is my fault," she said quietly, her scales pale with stress. "I broke the quarantine. I led them across the border. My ship's transmissions gave the hunters a direct path into Concordate space." Sarah Chen's synthetic form stood beside her, watching the same displays. "No," the AI said firmly. "This was inevitable. The hunters were always going to find the Concordate. Your species had been broadcasting for 8 centuries. You simply had the misfortune to be there when it finally happened." "Can humanity help?" Korth asked. The Volnath engineer had been studying the human fleet's technology for days, trying to understand their stealth systems. "You've been hiding from these things successfully. You must know something about how to fight them." "We know how to hide," Sarah corrected. "That's not the same as knowing how to fight. But yes, we may know things that could help. The Command Council is deliberating now." The Human Command Council had been awake for 2 days, 12 individuals pulled from 8 centuries of sleep, trying to process what had happened to the galaxy while they slumbered, trying to decide if humanity should break its long silence and risk everything to help species that hadn't believed their warnings. Velshara had spoken to them pleading her case. She had shown them the footage of the attacks. She had begged them to remember that not everyone in the Concordate had dismissed humanity's warnings. Some, like her, simply had never known about them until it was too late. The council had listened politely and then asked her to leave while they discussed the matter among themselves. That had been 12 hours ago. Finally, Sarah received a transmission. She listened to it in silence, her artificial face unreadable. Then she turned to Velshara and the others. The Council has made their decision. Humanity will help, but not in the way you might expect. A holographic display activated, showing the current positions of the Echo Hunters throughout concordate space. There were 8 of them now, spread across the outer and mid-rim systems. They were moving steadily inward, toward the core worlds where the concordate's major populations lived. We can't fight them, Sarah explained. No conventional weapon can harm an Echo Hunter. But we've studied them for over 1,000 years, since we first discovered what happened to the predecessors. We understand some of how they hunt. She manipulated the display, showing electromagnetic patterns radiating from the concordate worlds. They track consciousness through the electromagnetic signatures that thinking minds produce. But they're not intelligent in the way we understand intelligence. They're more like programs. Algorithms running on physics we don't fully understand. They follow signals. They feed on the patterns of sentient thought. But they can be confused. How? Velshara asked. By giving them too many signals to track. By flooding space with so much electromagnetic noise that they can't distinguish real civilizations from false ones. We call it the beacon protocol. Another human appeared in the holographic display. This one was biological, newly awakened from suspended animation. She was young-looking with dark skin and intense eyes. "I'm Commander Park," she said. "I led the development of the beacon protocol before we went into suspension. The theory is simple. We create thousands of false signals, broadcast them from automated drones scattered throughout space. The Echo Hunters will follow the false signals, wasting time investigating empty space while the real populations evacuate to shielded locations." "Will it work?" Miara asked. "We don't know," Commander Park admitted. "We never had a chance to test it. But it's the best option we have." Sarah added, "We're going to wake more of the fleet. Not everyone, but enough to crew the ships we need. We'll deploy the beacon drones throughout concordate space and then help evacuate your populations to temporary shelter locations where we can shield them from detection." "How long will we need to hide?" Korth asked. "Years, probably. Maybe decades. The Echo Hunters are patient. They'll search for a long time before moving on to other hunting grounds. But eventually, if they find nothing, they should leave." Velshara felt a strange mixture of hope and grief. Humanity was going to help, going to risk everything they had protected for 8 centuries. But the cost would be enormous. Billions of people forced into hiding, civilizations disrupted, perhaps destroyed. And all because no one had listened when humanity tried to warn them. "When do we start?" she asked. "Now," Sarah replied. "The fleet is already beginning the wake-up sequence. Within a week, we'll have 50,000 ships ready to deploy. The beacon protocol will activate simultaneously across all of concordate space. We need you to return to your government and convince them to cooperate with the evacuation." "Can you do that?" Velshara straightened, her scales settling into determined patterns. "I can try, then go. Time is running out. The Echo Hunters are moving faster now, drawn by all the distress signals and emergency broadcasts. We need to act before they reach the core worlds." As Velshara and her crew prepared to leave the human fleet, she looked back at the thousands of ships beginning to come to life. Running lights activated. Engines powered up for the first time in centuries. Humanity was waking up, emerging from its long silence to face the monsters it had been hiding from. She wondered if they would succeed, if this desperate plan would work, if the galaxy could be saved. But one thing was certain. Humanity had remembered how to fight. And they were about to remind the galaxy why their name had once been spoken with respect and fear. The question was whether that would be enough. The Concordate Council chamber was in chaos when Velshara arrived. Representatives from every member species shouted over each other, demanding answers, proposing desperate solutions, or simply expressing their terror at what was happening to their civilizations. 3 more core worlds had gone silent in the past day. The Echo Hunters were accelerating, drawn by the panic that filled every communication channel. Velshara stood at the entrance, watching the disorder with growing despair. These were supposed to be the galaxy's leaders, the wisest and most capable individuals their species could offer, but faced with a threat beyond their understanding, they had devolved into frightened animals. "You need to make them listen," Korth rumbled beside her. The Volneth engineer had insisted on coming with her, along with Miara and Ten. They had been through too much together to separate now. I don't know if they will, Velshara admitted, but I have to try. She walked down the central aisle toward the speaking platform, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor. Slowly, the chamber began to quiet as representatives noticed her approach. Velshara, the criminal who had broken quarantine and supposedly brought this disaster upon them all. How dare you show yourself here? Administrator Krell's voice boomed from the Kashari delegation. You violated the most sacred law of the Concordat. You entered forbidden space and led these monsters straight to us. Velshara reached the platform and turned to face the assembly. Her scales rippled with color, displaying the calm patterns of someone about to speak truth regardless of consequences. The monsters were already coming. They've been tracking our signals for centuries. I didn't lead them here. We led ourselves here by refusing to listen to humanity's warning 800 years ago. That caused an uproar. Half the chamber began shouting denials. But Velshara pressed on, her voice cutting through the noise. I have been to the heart of the forbidden territories. I have spoken with humanity. They are alive. They have been hiding in silence all this time, protecting themselves from the very threat that is now destroying our worlds. And despite everything, despite the fact that we ignored their warnings and called them cowards, they are willing to help us. She activated a holographic projector, filling the air above the chamber with images from her journey. The sleeping fleet, the Echo Hunters moving through dark space. Sarah Chen's synthetic form explaining the beacon protocol. Humanity has a plan, Velshara continued. It's not a guarantee of victory, but it's the only chance we have. They call it the beacon protocol. We create false signals to draw the Echo Hunters away from real populations, while we evacuate to shielded locations. Then we wait in silence until the Hunters move on. How long? Someone called from the Shren delegation. Years. Maybe decades. The chamber erupted again. Representatives shouted that it was impossible, that their civilizations couldn't survive that long in hiding, that there had to be another way. But Velshara could see in their eyes that they knew the truth. There was no other way. Fight the Echo Hunters directly and you died. Continue broadcasting and you died. The only option was silence and hiding. A single voice cut through the chaos. I believe her. Everyone turned. The speaker was Admiral Thross, the Volnath commander whose fleet had been destroyed attempting to fight an Echo Hunter. He had survived only because he had been on a shuttle returning from a supply station when his flagship went dark. Now he stood, his massive armored form dominating the Volnath section. I have seen what these things can do, Thross said, his voice heavy with the weight of his lost crews. Every weapon we have is useless against them. If humanity claims they know how to survive the Hunters, then we should listen. We should have listened 8 centuries ago. Slowly, other voices joined in agreement. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. The tide was turning. The vote, when it came, was close but decisive. The Concordat would accept humanity's help. They would implement the beacon protocol and begin evacuating their populations to designated shelter zones. They had no other choice. Velshara transmitted the decision to Sarah Chen, and within hours the human fleet began to move. It was the largest military operation the galaxy had ever seen, coordinated across thousands of light-years by a species that had been silent for 8 centuries. 50,000 human ships emerged from the forbidden territories, each one carrying technology that the Concordat had never imagined. They had spent 800 years in silence, but they hadn't spent that time idle. They had improved, adapted, innovated. Their stealth systems could make a battleship invisible to every sensor the Concordat possessed. Their communication systems used quantum entanglement in ways that produced no detectable electromagnetic signature. They had learned to wage war in silence. The beacon drones deployed first. Millions of them, scattered throughout Concordat space like seeds in wind. Each drone broadcast a signal that mimicked the electromagnetic signature of sentient thought, creating false populations where none existed. The Echo Hunters responded immediately, diverting from their current targets to investigate the new signals. It's working, Commander Park reported from the bridge of her ship, the UHSS Silent Guardian. She had taken command of the beacon protocol operation personally. The Hunters are following the false signals, but we need to start the evacuation now, while they're distracted. The evacuation was a nightmare of logistics. Billions of people needed to be moved from their homes to designated shelter zones. The Concordat's civilian fleet worked alongside human transport ships, ferrying refugees to hastily constructed facilities deep underground or in remote star systems. Velshara found herself coordinating the evacuation of her own home world. The Kishari population centers were densely packed, making them prime targets for the Echo Hunters. She worked without sleep for days, organizing transport schedules and managing the panic that threatened to turn orderly evacuation into chaos. On the 5th day of the operation, an Echo Hunter appeared at the edge of her home system. Velshara watched the sensor readings with her primary hearts in her throat. The massive entity drifted past the outer planets, following a beacon signal that led it away from the inhabited worlds. But it was so close. One shift in direction and it could reach her world in hours. A human ship appeared beside the Echo Hunter. The Silent Guardian itself, massive and powerful, moving with impossible stealth. Commander Park's voice came through on a narrow beam transmission. "We're going to try something. If it works, we can draw this hunter away faster. If it doesn't, well, evacuate faster." Before Velshara could respond, the Silent Guardian activated its engines at full power and broadcast a massive electromagnetic burst. Every sensor in the system lit up. The Echo Hunter stopped drifting and oriented toward the human ship. "What are you doing?" Velshara transmitted urgently. "Making ourselves louder," Park replied calmly. "We're broadcasting a signal that mimics an entire civilization. The hunter should follow us instead of investigating the planet." The Echo Hunter began moving toward the Silent Guardian with terrifying speed. But the human ship was faster. It accelerated away from the system, leading the hunter on a chase that took them both away from the inhabited worlds. Other human ships joined in, each one broadcasting false signals, creating a trail of electromagnetic breadcrumbs that led the Echo Hunter deep into empty space. The tactic worked. The hunter followed the human ships, drawn by what it thought was a fleeing population. By the time it realized the deception, the human ships had vanished into stealth mode, leaving the hunter alone in the dark with nothing to feed on. The same tactic was repeated across concordate space. Human ships deliberately drew the Echo Hunters away from real populations, risking themselves to protect species that had once abandoned them. It was a strategy born from centuries of preparation and a deep understanding of how the hunters behaved. But it came at a cost. 3 human ships were lost when their stealth systems failed, and the hunters caught them. Each loss meant hundreds of humans dead, sacrificed to save aliens they had never met. Sarah Chen's voice was heavy when she reported the losses to Velshara. "We knew there would be casualties, but knowing doesn't make it easier." "Why are you doing this?" Velshara asked. "After everything that happened, why risk yourselves for us?" The AI was quiet for a moment. "Because that's what sentient beings should do. We protect each other. We help each other survive. If we lose that, if we become so focused on our own survival that we stop caring about others, then what are we?" The Echo Hunters feed on sentience, but they're not sentient themselves. They're just hungry. We have to be better than that. Over the following months, the evacuation continued. More and more concordate citizens were moved to the shelter zones, hidden locations where the concentrated populations could be shielded from the Echo Hunters' senses. The human fleet provided technology to help with the shielding, force fields that disrupted electromagnetic signatures and made the shelters effectively invisible. The Echo Hunters continued their search, following the beacon signals through empty space, occasionally stumbling on a real population that hadn't evacuated quickly enough. But slowly, gradually, they began to find less and less. The galaxy was going quiet. Velshara worked alongside the humans through all of it, coordinating between the concordate and the human fleet. She came to know many of them by name. Commander Park, who led dangerous missions with calm competence. Admiral Chen, who had been a shuttle pilot before the Silence and now commanded a battle group. Dr. Yuki, a xenobiologist who studied the Echo Hunters with fierce determination to understand and eventually defeat them. They were just people, Velshara realized, not the legendary beings that the old stories had made them out to be, not superhumans or gods, just people who had been faced with an impossible choice and had made the best decision they could. People who had spent 8 centuries in silence because they believed it was the only way to survive. And now they were teaching the rest of the galaxy how to survive too. 2 years after the first Echo Hunter entered concordate space, the last major evacuation was completed. 97% of the concordate's population was now in shelter zones, hidden and silent. The remaining 3% were volunteers who maintained essential infrastructure, and helped coordinate the ongoing efforts. The Echo Hunters continued their search, but they were finding nothing. The beacon signals had all expired or been destroyed. The galaxy had gone quiet. How long do we wait? Velshara asked Sarah during one of their regular coordination meetings. Until they leave. We have deep space sensors monitoring their movements. When they start migrating away from this region, we'll know it's safe to begin bringing people out of hiding. And if they don't leave? Sarah's glowing eyes met Velshara's. Then we learn to live in silence, permanently. It's not ideal, but it's survival. Velshara thought about that. A galaxy of civilizations forced to hide, to limit their communications, to live in fear of drawing the wrong kind of attention. It was a grim future, but it was a future. That was more than they would have had without humanity's help. What will you do? She asked Sarah. After this is over? The AI considered the question. I don't know. We'll need to decide as a species whether we rejoin the galactic community or return to our territories and continue the silence. It's not an easy choice. I hope you stay, Velshara said quietly. The galaxy is better with humanity in it. Sarah smiled, a strange expression on her synthetic face, but genuine nonetheless. We'll see. 5 years after the crisis began, the sensors detected the Echo Hunters beginning to migrate. They were moving away from Concordat space, returning to the dark regions between galaxies. The beacon protocol had worked. The massive evacuation had worked. Humanity's sacrifice had worked. Slowly, carefully, the shelter zones began to open. People emerged into the light of their suns after years underground. Civilizations began to rebuild, more cautious now, more aware of the dangers that lurked in the dark. The Concordat was changed forever. New protocols were established, limiting long-range broadcasts and implementing warning systems to detect Echo Hunter activity. A new organization was formed, dedicated to monitoring deep space and maintaining the knowledge of how to survive if the hunters returned. And humanity didn't withdraw back to their territories. They remained, taking their place in the Concordat as equal members. The forbidden territories were renamed the Guardian Sectors, still home to the massive sleeping fleets that would wake if they were ever needed again, but no longer closed off from the rest of the galaxy. Velshara stood on the observation deck of the new Concordat headquarters, looking out at the stars. Beside her stood Sarah Chen, still in her synthetic body, having chosen to remain awake and serve as humanity's ambassador to the Concordat. We're establishing new protocols, Velshara said. Every species is learning the technologies of silence. If the hunters return, we'll be ready. Good, Sarah replied, but don't let fear consume you. The galaxy should be explored, should be lived in, just more carefully than before. The human way, Velshara said with a smile. The survival way, Sarah corrected. Which, yes, is something humans got good at. They stood in comfortable silence watching the stars. Out there in the darkness between galaxies, the Echo Hunters drifted through the void, always hunting, always listening. But here, in the light of civilization, sentient beings had learned how to hide when they needed to, and how to help each other survive. And if the hunters ever returned, they would find a galaxy that was ready for them, a galaxy that had learned the lessons humanity tried to teach 8 centuries ago. A galaxy that remembered. The stars whispered the name just as they always had. Human. The species that had tried to save everyone. That had hidden in silence for 800 years. And that had emerged when needed to teach the galaxy how to survive. If you still remembered, you understood why that name was spoken with respect, with gratitude, and with hope. Because humans had shown everyone that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose silence over pride, survival over glory, and protecting others over protecting your own reputation. The galaxy remembered, and it would never forget again.